Sometimes the most unexpected friendships are born from the deepest pain. In the vast wilderness of the American West, two lost souls were about to find each other in the most unlikely way. Jack Murphy had been riding these canyon trails for over 20 years, but he'd never seen anything like this. A young military working dog was following him, keeping its distance, but never leaving his side. At first, Jack thought it was just curious, maybe looking for an easy meal. But as the hours passed, he began to notice something different. In the dog's eyes, he saw not simple hunger, but desperation for help. The Belgian Malinois was thin, alone, and scared. When Jack finally understood what had happened to the dog's handler, the truth broke his heart. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for second chance stories. You won't want to miss what happens next. Trust me, this story will stay with you long after it's over. The sun painted the canyon walls in shades of amber and rust as Jack Murphy guided his horse Ranger along the familiar ridge trail. At 55, Jack moved with the practiced ease of a man who had spent more years in the saddle than most people spent behind a desk. The Double M Ranch stretched across 15,000 acres of some of the most beautiful and unforgiving land in northern Arizona. 3 generations of Murphys had worked this land. This morning's ride was part of Jack's weekly routine, checking fence lines, counting cattle, and simply being present in the landscape that had shaped him. He pulled a small leather journal from his shirt pocket, its brown cover worn from years of handling. Every significant observation went into this journal, continuing a tradition passed down from his father and grandfather. Ranger snorted and shook his head, ears pricking forward at something Jack couldn't yet see. The horse was 12 years old, a sturdy quarter horse with intelligence in his dark eyes and an uncanny ability to sense things before his rider did. "What is it, boy?" Jack murmured, scanning the horizon. The canyon opened up before them, a vast amphitheater of red rock and sagebrush that had remained largely unchanged for thousands of years. Jack's thoughts drifted to his son Michael. He had been gone 3 years now, killed in action in Afghanistan. The grief had settled into something more manageable now, but he still missed their conversations about ranch life and Michael's dreams of coming home to take over the operation. It was Ranger who sensed it first. The horse's ears snapped forward like radar dishes, and his muscles tensed beneath Jack. They had crested a small rise when Ranger suddenly stopped, refusing to move forward despite Jack's gentle urging. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured. In 20 years of riding this country, he had learned to trust Ranger's instincts completely. Jack scanned the landscape ahead, his experienced eyes moving methodically across the terrain. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement among the rocks, perhaps 75 yards ahead. At first, Jack thought it might be a coyote, but the movement was wrong. Too deliberate, too tactical. A dog emerged from behind a boulder, its coat a dusty tan and black that would have been perfect camouflage if not for the worn tactical vest still strapped to its body. The animal was clearly a Belgian Malinois, the preferred breed for military work. It stood motionless for a moment, watching them with intense dark eyes, then took several cautious steps forward. Jack's first reaction was confusion. Military dogs weren't uncommon near the base 200 miles south, but one this far into civilian territory, alone, and still wearing tactical gear. Something was wrong with this picture. The dog's movements were precise, but exhausted. Its head stayed level, scanning constantly, even from a distance. Jack could see that its ribs were showing beneath its coat. "Where's your handler, soldier?" Jack whispered. The dog took another few steps toward them, and Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Military dogs were trained to stay with their handlers no matter what. For one to be wandering alone suggested either extreme circumstances or something seriously wrong. Jack slowly reached for his binoculars. Through the magnified lenses, the animal's condition became heartbreakingly clear. The dog was severely underweight, its coat dull and matted with what looked like old blood. Its eyes held a desperate quality that Jack recognized from his son's final leave, the look of a warrior pushed to the very edge of survival. Christ, Jack breathed. The dog couldn't weigh more than 50 pounds, far too light for an animal that should have been 70 pounds of lean muscle. The implications hit Jack like a physical blow. Something had happened to the handler. Military dogs didn't abandon their posts. They stayed until ordered to leave, or physically unable to continue. The dog took another step forward, and Jack noticed something that made his heart clench. The animal was limping slightly, favoring its left front leg, but still maintaining tactical awareness, constantly checking flanks and rear. Against decades of accumulated wisdom about approaching unknown dogs, especially military-trained ones, Jack dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Let's see what we're dealing with here, soldier," he said quietly. Jack took a step toward the dog, then another. The Malinois didn't flee. Instead, it sat. A trained response, not submission, but tactical positioning. Up close, its condition was even more alarming. Jack could count every rib beneath its fur, and there were healing wounds on its legs and side that looked like shrapnel injuries. The dog made a sound, not quite a whine, not quite a bark, but something plaintive and desperate that cut through Jack's defenses like a knife. It was the sound of a soldier who'd lost everything but couldn't stop fighting. Jack had dealt with working dogs before. His son had told him stories about the Canine units in Afghanistan. But this was different. Every rational part of his mind told him this dog could be dangerous, traumatized, unpredictable. But looking into those dark eyes, seeing the desperate hope reflected there, Jack felt something shift inside him. "I don't know what happened to you, soldier," Jack said quietly. His voice seemed to calm the dog, whose ears tracked the sound with laser focus. "But you're safe now." Jack found himself thinking of Michael, wondering what his son would have done. Michael had always spoken with reverence about the military dogs, calling them the bravest warriors he'd served with. "Everything deserves a chance," Michael used to say on their satellite calls, "especially those who've given everything in service." The memory hit him with unexpected force. What would Michael say about this desperate soldier looking to him for salvation? Jack knew the answer, and it both frightened and comforted him. But what Jack didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The dog's story was far more complex than abandonment, and the truth behind its desperate condition would challenge everything Jack thought he knew about sacrifice and loyalty. As he knelt in the dust, trying to decide what to do next, forces were already in motion that would transform this encounter into a life-changing journey. The dog took another tentative step closer, and Jack noticed something that made his heart race. Around the animal's neck, barely visible beneath the tactical vest, was a name tape: SGT Duke, Handler, CPT M. Riley. Jack spent 2 hours simply sitting with Duke, neither moving toward nor away from the desperate animal. The dog settled into a defensive position, its dark eyes never leaving Jack's face, while still maintaining 360-degree awareness. Ranger grazed nearby, having decided that this military animal posed no threat. The sun climbed higher, and Jack found himself facing an impossible decision. He couldn't leave Duke here to die, but bringing a military working dog to the ranch presented problems he wasn't prepared to handle. Jack pulled out his cell phone. No signal. As expected, he was on his own with this decision. Duke made another plaintive sound, and Jack felt his resolve crystallizing. "All right, soldier," he said quietly. "I guess we're going to figure this out together." Moving slowly, Jack retrieved emergency supplies from his saddlebags. Duke watched every movement, but didn't react aggressively when Jack set down water and beef jerky within the dog's reach. The process took nearly an hour, but eventually Duke drank and ate, his training keeping him alert even while consuming the desperately needed sustenance. The ride back to the ranch was unlike anything Jack had experienced. Duke followed at a precise distance, not too close to be a threat, not too far to lose contact. Military spacing, Jack realized. The dog moved with tactical precision, despite exhaustion, constantly checking their six, clearing corners, even on the open trail. The ranch buildings came into view just as Roberto Santos emerged from the equipment barn. Roberto was Jack's foreman and closest friend, a man 10 years younger with the build of someone who had spent his life doing physical work. "Boss," Roberto called out, "you're back early. Everything all right?" Jack dismounted carefully, acutely aware of Duke maintaining position 20 feet away. "Roberto, I need you to prepare yourself for something unusual." Roberto's experienced eyes immediately noted the tactical dog. "Dios mío, that's a military dog. What's it doing way out here?" "Near as I can figure, he lost his handler," Jack said. "Look at his condition. He's been on his own for a while." Roberto studied Duke's bearing, and Jack could see recognition dawn. Roberto's nephew had served 2 tours in Iraq. He knew about military dogs. "Where's his unit?" Roberto asked. "These dogs don't just wander off." "Gone has to be, for him to be in this condition." Roberto removed his hat and ran a hand through his graying hair. "You know the military's going to want their dog back." "I know," Jack replied. "But Roberto, look at this animal. Really look at him." Roberto did look, and Jack saw the moment when practical considerations gave way to compassion. Duke sat at perfect attention despite his exhaustion, still maintaining his post even without a handler to protect. "I couldn't leave him up there to die," Jack said quietly. "Michael would never have forgiven me." The mention of Jack's late son seemed to settle something for Roberto. He had loved Michael like his own son. "All right," Roberto said finally. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me get him settled somewhere safe while we figure out our next move. And Roberto, this stays between us for now." Together, they converted the old equipment shed behind the main barn into a makeshift kennel. Roberto worked efficiently, clearing out accumulated equipment, while Jack drove to town for supplies, dog food, medical supplies, and bedding. At Peterson's Feed and Supply, Jack found himself purchasing items he couldn't fully explain. Mary Peterson raised an eyebrow at the unusual combination, but was wise enough not to press for details. Back at the ranch, Roberto had transformed the shed into something resembling a military kennel. The concrete floor was covered with tactical mats Roberto had found in Michael's old room. Fresh water sat in multiple locations. Duke would want escape routes and water access from any position. "Pretty fancy accommodations for a stray dog," Roberto observed. "He's not a stray," Jack said. "He's MIA." They spent the next hour discussing immediate care needs. Jack made a mental note to call Dr. Susan Coleman, the local veterinarian who had worked with military dogs at the base, before going into private practice. As evening approached, Duke began showing signs of accepting his temporary position. He'd established a defensive perimeter, identified all exits, and was now allowing himself to rest, though never completely relaxing. "He's still on duty," Roberto observed. "Even without his handler, he's still protecting something." "The question is what?" Jack said. That evening, Jack sat outside the shed, with Duke maintaining distance but accepting proximity. The dog's discipline was remarkable. No begging, no whining, just professional patience. Roberto found him there as darkness fell. "Brooding isn't going to solve anything, boss." "I keep thinking about what Michael said about these dogs," Jack said. "How they'd take bullets for their handlers. How they were heroes without ever asking for recognition." "Michael understood service," Roberto replied gently. "He'd understand this dog needs more than we can provide." The crisis came when Duke's vest shifted, revealing a pocket Jack hadn't noticed. Inside was a blood-stained note, barely legible. "If found, Duke served with honor. Handler, KIA 06/15. Please contact Military Working Dog Unit. He's a hero. CPT Riley." The date was 3 months ago. Jack's hands shook as he read. This dog had been surviving alone for 3 months after watching his handler die. The loyalty and determination required to keep going, to keep searching for help, was staggering. Sheriff Tom Bradley called 2 days later. "Jack, I'm getting reports about you harboring a military animal. That true?" Jack met the sheriff at the front gate. Tom Bradley was 52, a career law enforcement officer who had known Jack for 15 years. "Tom," Jack said, shaking the sheriff's hand, "it's complicated." "It always is with you, Jack. Show me what we're dealing with." Tom's expression changed when he saw Duke. The dog immediately recognized the uniform and snapped to attention, years of training overriding everything else. "Jesus," Tom breathed. "That's a combat dog." "His handler was killed 3 months ago," Jack explained, showing him the note. "He's been trying to complete his mission ever since." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "You know I have to report this to the military." "I know. But—" Tom paused. "Maybe I could wait a few days. Let you get him healthy enough to travel." Dr. Coleman arrived that afternoon. Her examination was thorough, but careful. Duke allowed it, but remained vigilant. Shrapnel wounds, partially healed. Malnutrition, dehydration. "But what concerns me most is the psychological trauma," she said. "This dog has PTSD as severe as any human veteran." "Can you help him?" "Medically, yes. Psychologically, that's going to take time and patience." Over the next week, Duke slowly began to accept his new situation. He maintained his post, but allowed Jack closer proximity. He ate regularly, but always checked for threats first. He slept, but never deeply. Then came the morning that changed everything. Jack was woken by Duke's alert bark. Not aggressive, but urgent. He found the dog at the shed door, clearly agitating about something. Following Duke's lead, Jack discovered what had triggered the response. A young hiker had fallen in a ravine near the property boundary, invisible from the normal trails, but somehow detected by Duke's trained senses. The rescue took 2 hours, Duke guiding Jack with the precision of a military operation. The hiker, a college student named Sarah, had a broken ankle and mild hypothermia. Without Duke's alert, she might not have been found for days. "Your dog saved my life," Sarah said, as the paramedics prepared to transport her. "He's not my dog," Jack said, watching Duke maintain overwatch of the entire operation. "He's a soldier who hasn't been relieved from duty. Word spread quickly. The local news picked up the story. War hero dog saves hiker. Then national news, MIA military dog continues service. The military response was swift. Major Patricia Harrison arrived within 48 hours, official and efficient. Mr. Murphy, Sergeant Duke is military property. He needs to be returned immediately. Jack had expected this. Major, with respect, look at him. Duke was demonstrating tactical movements for Roberto's grandchildren, who had come to visit. Patient, professional, but with something Jack hadn't seen before: contentment. He completed his mission, Jack continued. He survived, found help, and even saved a civilian life. Doesn't he deserve to choose what comes next? Major Harrison struggled with protocol versus compassion. These dogs don't retire to civilian life. They need structured environments, continued training. He has that here, Jack interrupted. Every morning, we run perimeter checks. He's established security protocols. He's even training my ranch dogs in basic detection work. Dr. Coleman intervened. Major, from a medical perspective, relocating Duke now could cause significant psychological setback. He's finally beginning to process his trauma in a safe environment. The discussion continued for hours. Finally, Major Harrison made a phone call to her superiors. The compromise was unexpected. Duke would remain at the ranch under a special adoption program for retired military dogs with regular check-ins and continued medical support from the VA. Sergeant Duke served with distinction, Major Harrison said formally. 6 tours, 14 confirmed saves, wounded in action twice. His handler's family specifically requested he be allowed to retire somewhere peaceful. She produced a folder of documentation, including a photo of Duke with Captain Riley, a young man who looked disturbingly like Michael. Captain Riley's mother included this note, Harrison said, handing Jack an envelope. Duke was more than my son's partner. He was his best friend. They saved each other's lives countless times. If Duke has found peace with you, please let him stay. He's earned it. Margaret Riley. That evening, Jack sat with Duke in the shed that had become the dog's chosen quarters. For the first time, Duke approached and made physical contact, resting his head on Jack's knee. You can stand down now, soldier, Jack said softly. Mission complete. Duke's eyes remained alert. That would never change, but his body relaxed in a way Jack hadn't seen before. Roberto found them there later. He's home, isn't he? We both are, Jack replied, thinking of Michael, of Captain Riley, of all the warriors who never made it back. Sometimes home isn't where you started. It's where you find peace after the war. 6 months later, Duke had transformed from a desperate soldier to a ranch guardian. He worked alongside Jack every day, his military training adapting perfectly to ranch security. He tracked lost cattle with tactical precision, detected predators before they became threats, and even helped train other dogs in basic patrol work. The hiker Duke had saved, Sarah, became a regular visitor, eventually documenting Duke's story for a veterans magazine. The article, titled "The War Dog Who Wouldn't Quit," raised awareness about military working dogs and their struggles after service. Veterans began visiting the ranch, drawn by Duke's story. The dogs seemed to recognize them as fellow warriors, offering the silent understanding that only those who'd served could provide. One afternoon, a young veteran named Marcus arrived, missing his left leg and most of his spirit. Duke approached him immediately, something he rarely did with strangers. That's Sergeant Duke, Jack explained. He lost his handler in Afghanistan. Marcus looked at the dog with new understanding. You too, huh? What followed was remarkable. Duke began what could only be described as therapy work, spending hours with Marcus, demonstrating that survival after loss was possible. He gets it, Marcus told Jack after a week of daily visits. He knows what it's like to lose everything and keep going anyway. More veterans came. Duke worked with each one, his approach varying based on their needs. For some, he was a patient listener. For others, a training partner who helped them regain purpose through teaching him new skills. Dr. Coleman documented the transformations. Duke's doing instinctively what trained therapy dogs take years to learn. He's identifying trauma and responding appropriately. Jack found himself coordinating an informal program, warriors and working dogs, that paired veterans with retired military dogs who needed homes. One evening, as Jack updated his leather journal with the day's observations, Duke brought him something he'd never seen before, Captain Riley's dog tags, which must have been hidden in his vest all along. Jack held them up to the light, reading the embossed information. Then he noticed Duke had brought something else, a small photo that had been tucked behind the tags. It showed Riley and Duke in Afghanistan, both young and fierce and ready for anything. On the back, in fading ink, Duke, brother, warrior, hero, always. He'd be proud of you, Jack told Duke, still serving, just in a different way. Duke's response was to resume his position, watching, protecting, ready for whatever came next. 3 years after their first encounter, Jack stood before a gathering at the ranch. Veterans, families, active duty military, and civilians had come for the dedication of the Warriors Rest Foundation, a rehabilitation program for military working dogs and their handlers. Duke sat at perfect attention beside him, now wearing a vest that read Therapy Dog, alongside his military service ribbons. Duke taught me something important, Jack said to the crowd. Service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Sometimes the greatest battles are the ones we fight after the war, the battle to find peace, purpose, and home. He looked at Duke, who maintained his professional bearing, despite the grey now threading through his muzzle. This dog completed an impossible mission. He survived alone for 3 months, found help, saved lives, and showed us that broken doesn't mean defeated. The crowd applauded, but Duke remained still, professional to the end. Later, as the sun set over the canyon, Jack and Duke walked their evening patrol. The dog moved slower now, but with undiminished purpose. Every fence line checked, every corner cleared, every duty honored. They stopped at the ridge, where they'd first met. Jack often brought Duke here, wondering if the dog remembered that desperate day when 2 lost souls had found each other. Duke sat beside him, no longer maintaining tactical spacing, but pressed close, trust earned through years of patient understanding. You know what, soldier? Jack said. Michael would have loved you. He understood that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's continuing the mission despite it. Duke's response was to lean harder against Jack's leg, his eyes still scanning the horizon, but his body finally, truly at rest. In the distance, a hawk called, wild and free but purposeful. Duke's ears tracked the sound automatically, the warrior's alertness that would never fully fade, but his tail wagged slightly, the simple joy of a dog who had found his place. They sat together as darkness fell. A rancher who'd lost his son, and a war dog who'd lost his handler, both discovering that sometimes the family you find is stronger than the one you lost. The next morning brought new arrivals, a German shepherd named Rex, who'd lost her handler to an IED, and his new partner, a Marine named David, struggling with survivor's guilt. Duke greeted them with professional assessment, then led Rex to the shed that had become the intake center. Jack watched Duke work, marveling at the transformation. The desperate soldier he'd found was now a leader, teaching other dogs that survival was possible, that service continued, that peace could exist after war. "That'll do, Sergeant," Jack called as Duke completed his orientation of the new arrival. "That'll do." Duke looked back, and in his eyes, Jack saw not the desperate animal he'd found, but a warrior at peace, scarred but strong, wounded but willing, forever on duty, but finally home. This incredible story of Duke and Jack proves that the most broken warriors can still serve with honor. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of resilience. Subscribe to Second Chance Stories for more incredible tales of dogs who refuse to give up. What part of Duke's unwavering service moved you most? Let us know in the comments below. Your support helps us continue sharing these life-changing stories of canine courage and redemption.